Give it just a couple of seconds. And we are now live. Welcome, everybody, to episode 8 of season 5 of the Level Up Your Wealth podcast. We talk about the gaming industry from a business perspective. I'm one of your hosts, Marcus Howard, joined by Mario and Gae. Gae, we can't wait to speak to you. Mario, please say hello to everyone.
What's going on, y'all? Hope all is well. Another beautiful but rainy day in Jacksonville, Florida, but wouldn't have it any other way, though.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
If it's raining, is it raining, Gae, over in LA? It like rarely rains, right? That's like a bad.
I feel like it rains about 20 days a year here, and it's usually between December and January. So it's not raining. Hasn't rained in a very long time. All our hills are turning brown right now.
That's probably not good for fires.
It doesn't rain in Southern California.
It may actually rain. It was looking pretty cloudy today, which is surprising. So fingers crossed that we get something and that staves off the dryness.
Yeah. You just had earthquake like 2-3 weeks ago?
Okay. Yeah, 5.1 in Malibu, but it wasn't super. It wasn't really destructive, so it was just shy of it. We actually had 3 earthquakes. Like we all have our earthquake app, but the other ones were like 3.5, 3.2. So you kind of feel them, but they don't even make the cracks in your house larger.
Wow. So just shakes. So we say you don't feel like it has to be like a something.
Yeah, it depends. Like, what's funny is if you're driving, sometimes you won't even feel them because the shock absorbers in the car will just eat the shocks, or eat the shakes, so you won't feel them. But like people at home will feel them, right? So, and also depends on where you are and like the soil and all that kind of nonsense. But yeah, usually everybody hears about it when it's like above like a 4.5, but it doesn't usually cause problems unless it's higher.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're on National Geographic right now talking about earthquakes, but so
right.
So what's it called? Like when it engulfs itself. Like what's that called with the earthquake? Like when the earthquake like opens up and like the house.
Oh, like a sinkhole? You're talking about a sinkhole?
Yeah. Does that happen a lot, or is that just like sensationalized on the news?
Actually, I haven't found that to happen around here. I've been here 15 years, like on the West Coast, and the most I've had is like a little bit of a shake. Fires are way more dangerous. Like those happen every season, and that they're super, super catastrophic. So that's the stuff to worry about if you live on the West Coast more than quakes. Although once in a while there's a big one. So we like our quakes frequent and small. That's the thing that you want, right?
Okay.
So on the topic of groundbreaking, right? You're breaking some ground with your new studio, still in stealth mode. We're gonna dive into that in a little bit, but first, it's a tradition here. Those of you who joined us, you know that we always kick the episodes off with rock, paper, scissors. So Mario, if you'll share your screen, It's first to 5. Let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from and who you've got for the win. Who's gonna be the first to 5 points?
All right. So okay, you went first.
But Mario won last week.
Yeah, I'm like 7, probably like a 70% win rate. So that's epic right there. Like if I was playing baseball, batting 300 gets you into the Hall of Fame if you're not juicing. So 700 is pretty good.
I'm interested in your next choice. Let's see what happens. Yes, we're getting there. I don't know. Let's see.
So it shows your play history at the top and the bottom of the screen, so you can see your history and his. I don't know if that's going to help you or hurt you.
I'm starting to realize how this is working.
Yeah, actually, I play this game with new clients because when clients talk about like their risk tolerance and if they're aggressive or conservative, depending on if you're winning or losing, the way that you play is kind of a reflection of how you are in real life from an investment standpoint. So, it appears
I think there's a couple other versions of this game that are just kind of a spin on it. I forget off the top of my head where they're played though.
You got us a lot of draws here.
That's right. We're just like down to the wire with this one.
It's like
trying to predict. Excellent.
Match point.
It's like deuce. Yeah, there you go. It's like deuce and tennis. Oh,
God for the win.
Oh man.
We put in a strong effort.
To the victor goes the spoils, I guess.
Guy, right before we talk about your studio, just a quick update. We almost dedicated a full episode to this. This might have been like season 3 or 4. Early on the year, on January, Power World was making waves because they had Pokemon with guns and Mario. You might not have seen this, Guy. I think you've seen it. Nintendo and Pokemon World are now suing Power World for IP infringement.
Yep, I did notice that. We were amongst the industry. We were all kind of speculating on when that was going to happen, or if it was going to happen, because there's a bunch of kind of really interesting facts about it, and so it sounds like enough money was made. So I guess we will find out how it all shakes out. I think at a surface level, what I read in the news was that they're really going after sort of the Pokeball mechanic as a thing rather than the other aspects of the IP. But it'll be fascinating to see because the companies work together, and so there's like it's a really interesting story. I remember I talked to Don Gowan, who was counsel at some point for the Pokemon Company, I think. So he had a lot of sort of information on the way that the companies thought, right? And the way they looked at litigation and the way that litigation is different in the U.S. versus Japan versus Europe, right? And when companies do actually decide to go again and go into a lawsuit and I guess air their dirty laundry, so to speak. But those guys made like what, $450 million on the game, so
yeah, I think they crossed the threshold.
pretty large target that they painted, and their practices are just like also sort of wild and how they decided to go to market with that. So I guess we'll all find out. We all get to see what kind of precedent is set.
Did they, in the actual lawsuit, did they put like damages, like how much intrinsically, how much the damages were? Because you would think like how much they're going to try to get back out of that $450 million.
I haven't read the details of the lawsuit itself, but I think that somebody was comparing it to a different lawsuit that Nintendo had brought earlier this year. So it's going to be, I think, this is they're probably going to go for a pretty big sort of piece of the pie because that's where you start with, and then like it'll all get resolved, I'm sure.
Yeah. Nintendo happens to be like, I think, notorious for being like one of the most litigious gaming companies there are out there. I've seen them send cease and desist letters for like fan games that vaguely reference the IP.
They have a lot of brand to protect, right? They have some of the most storied and cherished brands in games, so I can totally understand why. But I think that it's hard to see. I used to work at Riot, right, and we were very much about empowering our community to put events together. So on that end, it's just completely not understandable to anyone in the industry as to why you would try to shut down player engagement. But if you're a storied company that tries to really look after the way their brand is portrayed, kind of like Disney, right? Like you end up having like a large kind of legal apparatus that is constantly on the hunt to not create precedent that will cause problems down the line. One of the other reasons why I wanted to be part of a small company, because none of those conversations will be had because we can't afford lawyers. So it's like we can barely afford the lawyers that we really need. So it's there's a double-edged sword everywhere, I think.
What do you think? What do you think about trying to copyright or patent gameplay mechanics? And like, I've never seen that.
Really tricky. I think it's a really tricky argument to make, right? Because games always copy from each other, and they always end up making. Again, we are a very litigious society here in the U.S. For better or worse. Like I think that there's a lot of aspects of it that have shaped our culture And then there's a lot of ways in which you look at it and it's kind of ridiculous. Like there's like, patent trolls like sitting on stuff and just stifling innovation rather than promoting it. But the original intent, like the right to a speedy trial, that's awesome. Like I grew up in Italy and that didn't exist. And, I think my parents actually had this like malpractice lawsuit against the hospital there because of, some really bad stuff that happened medically. And it took him like 15 years to just get the hospital or the judge to say the hospital's at fault. They don't need to pay you anything, but they're at fault. It's like just wild, right? Like that would just not happen here. We have all kinds of other problems on the tail end of that, but I think that I like the model of a speedy trial at least.
So you started. You mentioned Riot. Can you take us back to your start into the gaming industry before Riot? Or was Riot the beginning?
Yeah, Riot was the beginning. So I actually did. I was in startups before that. I was in this crazy clinical trial startup. But I'll rewind the clock all the way back to when I first got into games, which is a story I can tell because just recently I found out the details of it. So I'm a huge student of the industry, and so I found out that Atari ran this crazy marketing campaign where this was back when they were pushing the Atari 2600, which tells you, I guess, how old I am. And this is, I think it wasn't 79. I think it must have been like 84 or something. I don't know. Anyway, so they got these Atari 2600s and they gave them, they put them in 18-wheelers and gave them to ad executives all over Europe. That was part of their campaign. And apparently, my dad was an ad executive at some magazine, if you remember what those are. They're the things that you pick up in airports, I think, in between. I don't know if you can get them anywhere else. But basically, they ended up giving him an Atari 2600 because they were trying to seed with ad executives the idea that these consoles are going to be the next generation of consumer products. And so at home, he came back with a present that Christmas. And to this day, to a year ago, I just thought he was like a forward-thinking guy that wanted to get me into technology. But he just got it for free. And so I asked him about it. And he was like, oh, yeah, they just gave it to me at work. So, of course, I thought it was cool. So I got it. I brought it home. And that's how I got introduced to games. My first game was Space Invaders. And it was super fun. And ever since, I've been hooked. And so I always wanted to work in games, but I kind of never knew how. And so when I came over to the States to study, I went to Rutgers, and then I was working in Manhattan in Union Square for this startup that went from like 50 people to 1,000 in like 5 years. They went public on the NASDAQ. It was like really fascinating business. It completely revolutionized the way that people captured clinical trial data, which is super interesting to people that care about the medical field and extremely boring to me. But the business side was super fun. So I got to learn a lot about international business, but at the end of the going public on the NASDAQ, I just said, you know what, like I'm always reading about games. I'm not just playing them. I'm reading about how they come together. The business side, I was like, I need to figure out how to architect a mid-career transition in some capacity. And so I was like, I'm pretty sure most of these game companies just want me to start in QA and just redo the last 10 years of my career. So I need to find one that's a startup so they'll at least take risks on someone from outside the industry. And I had a lot of experience in client services and like keeping satisfaction high with like consumers. And so there was a small startup at the time out of Santa Monica called Riot Games. They had a game where they prided themselves in being high touch with their community. And they had a bunch of issues that came from being highly successful and sort of having a staff that needed to grow to support this rising game called League of Legends. And so I moved my entire family from New Jersey to Santa Monica to play League and figure out how to help them deal with. I remember like when I started, they gave me this title that was like special projects. That is what companies give you when they don't really know what job you want. They're like, I guess this guy seems smart enough. Let's see if it works out, and if not, we'll just like tell him to go packing. And it kind of worked out because I was there for 3 years. We did like international community development. We created the first streamer program. We put a scholarship for video games, which was a personal point of pride, since everybody always told me that I was wasting my time in school. And then we did all kinds of other stuff. We sent like kits to colleges so they could run their own tournaments and then broadcast them and get into like the competitive scene. So did really very cool kind of things that U.S. companies at the time were not really focused on doing, because League of Legends was one of the first free-to-play games that was in the West, right? Like in Asia, they already kind of knew all about that, but in the West, we didn't really have the free-to-play model, and the League model was super not really commercially aggressive, and so and players loved it. And so we ended up having over 100 million players, and that was super fun. And then I decided, and I reminded myself after 3 years, I was like, all right, well, I really didn't get into this just to work on one game. And so I ended up moving to San Francisco to work on a bunch of mobile games for this company called Kabam. And
another little known company.
Yes, they made Marvel Contest of Champions. I got there just in time to help them ship that. They also had a bunch of issues because mobile at the time was just sort of, people were starting to realize that they could just ban all their high spenders, a very casino model type of games. You had Machine Zone and Supercell and Zynga, right? They had all figured out that they could make a casino where you never win and make money. And I was like, well, that's not surprising, but I'm pretty sure at some point this won't last. I mean, you all get rich in the process because casino owners have gotten rich since dawn immemorial. But I think you should probably start caring about your players. I failed to convince that many people of that, but I did convince them, and I will take credit for a little bit of peeling back the aggressive monetization of Marvel Contest of Champions enough that it got to succeed and be a massive game, obviously because of the team that made a really fun game as well. And that was super cool, but I was kind of burnt out on mobile after a couple of years, and I decided, you know what, I really would like to get into like story-driven, like AAA. That's the stuff that I grew up on. So I found this other company called CD Projekt Red. At the time, wanted to finish properly shipping Witcher 3. They'd already done a very good job on that. I can't take any credit there. But I kind of came on board to help them further capitalize on the special edition or whatever, and starting the beginning of the Cyberpunk 2077 kind of brand ideation, and Gwent, which is a really fun card game that was kind of meant to teach the company how to, they succeeded at having it in Witcher, and they wanted to bring it and make it a standalone game while learning about sort of multiplayer systems, and that's that. We did a bunch of that. That was super fun. I learned a lot about the complete difference between taking a AAA game to market versus working on kind of this like live service, right? And so I had like live services, PC, mobile, and I had AAA under my belt. The fine folks at CD Projekt wanted me to move to Poland, and I thought it was wonderful, but I really didn't think I could convince my wife to move to Poland from Southern California. My line on that is like, I don't think like the amount of money it would have taken was not the amount of money they would have been willing to pay me for my skills. So I decided, you know what, let me see if I can make something else happen. So I went on a little bit of a soul search of like what companies I could work for, did a bunch of contracts, and then I landed serendipitously enough on this company called Skydance, who had just bought this studio called The Workshop, which was a work-for-hire studio founded by the co-founders of Treyarch, Pete Ackman and Chris Bussey. And they basically, like, they sold Treyarch to Activision. They created this studio. It had been in business for like years. And Skydance was like, how about like you come make VR games for us? And they'd done that. And somehow through serendipity of fate, they decided that they were going to launch 2 VR games on the same day with no marketing team, which went exactly how you think it went. And then they were like, we'll probably get a marketing person. And I just happened to be there just in time for it. So I was just like, all right, like let me figure out like what we could do here. And they had a really talented team, very ahead. Like they pioneered a lot of technology, right? Like they built the original like Spider-Man like web slinging system for like Spider-Man 2, I believe. And they worked with Sony on the Move. They're a fantastic technical team. And so they started working in VR. We just kind of got in right after at the trough of disillusionment, when like all the sort of venture money it fled after losing a bunch of it. And so I felt like if I can actually succeed at making a game successful here, I feel like it won't be just because I jumped on a rocket ship that had already left the station. And so I proceeded to figure out how we could make. They had put out a mech game. I tried to do a mode for it to kind of bump up the Metacritic enough that people would buy our next game. And then we put out The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, which is a pretty awesome VR game. I tell everyone without shame, like if you haven't tried it, go find a headset and try it. It's like you have not experienced the true zombie apocalypse until you've tried that game. The guys that made that, the physics systems there are just geniuses. Really cool. It'll teach you a lot about survival, and that, like, you know, two-handed weapons are cool, but when you need one of the hands to, you know, heal yourself or push zombies away, one-handed weapons are better. So and it's like it's so impactful. Like you could drop weapons and like just be in a full panic. So it's a really cool game. We kind of like got it to market. It was a moment of serendipity where we aligned sort of talent, luck, and timing, which is sort of what I recognize are the things you have to align to truly hit outlier status. And so we made like $100 million in VR between that and Chapter 2. We got Behemoth greenlit, which was an awesome like concept that we just got, like we were brainstorming on it. We're like, what if we make Dark Souls plus Shadow of the Colossus in VR? I think we could do something really cool. And so we like ended up like the day before. So this is a crazy story. So what happened is 2 days before the pandemic like fully shut down everything, we went up to pitch it to Meta. And what's crazy is that it was like me and the head of studio, and our wives were like, "You're not going to the airport. There's this thing happening." And so we're like, "Well, we got to pitch it because we're not going to get it greenlit." So we drove from LA to one hacker away in San Francisco, in Palo Alto, or where Facebook is, Menlo Park. I think it's Menlo Park. And so we drove up there, pitched it to Verdu, who now works at Netflix, and Aaron, who still works at Meta, and kind of they were like, "All right, this is awesome. Let's make it happen." And then we kind of went about convincing other folks, like the Sony guys, to jump in. So we kind of convinced Meta and Sony to sort of jump into the fray with us. They were both wonderful with each other because they all kind of believed in the space, and we got to make a game that all I can talk about is the public stuff. Go play it when it comes out later this year. It's gone through a lot of sort of blood, sweat, and tears and pixels, I suppose. And so I'm highly confident it'll be a really fun experience. But I about a year ago, like November, I was like, and before November, really, I was thinking about like what I want to do with my life. And I had basically shipped to every platform you can think of, except for Switch, which is on my to-do list. And I was like, all right, I know free to play, I know paid, I've done VR. I always wanted to start my own studio, but I never thought I had enough know-how. The time at Skydance is really cool because it taught me, sort of filled in a lot of gaps because I got to wear a lot of hats, be like on marketing and like help a little bit on the product side, very little, and then like do a bunch of like biz dev and understand kind of all the pieces that have to happen from concept all the way to ship and post. And so I was like, I think I can step on half the landmines that are out there. And so I decided this sounds like an awesome year to start a company. So November 23, I was like, term sheet in hand, jumped into the fray, tried to get some funding going. And so it's been a wild ride, with ups and downs of like, yes, we got the money. No, we don't have the money. We have less money. There's not enough money. We got to hire people out of all over the world. Now, because we thought about it for a very long time, we thought, how are we going to create a company that we all want to work for, that we all always wanted to work for? And we said, well, the pandemic taught us one thing. Your life can be a lot better if you can build it around what you care about, and you can perform highly if you just get the right type of people together. So we decided we only want to work with autodidacts with a passion for knowledge, because that solves a lot of the other problems. People that kind of know what they want to be when they grow up. We want people that get together and are able to kind of work autonomously. If you can get people like that, then it becomes a lot easier to work fully remote. So we have been fully remote, but in part out of necessity, right? Because it's a lot less expensive and you can tap into worldwide talent. But in part because I remember, I always use this story, which is there's this wonderful artist, and he had a kid he really needed to take care of, and he had a 4-hour-a-day commute. And the pandemic made his life so much better because it forced us to do development from home. And then like at some point, we had this big conversation in leadership about return to office. And, you know, we were all fighting against it because we thought that our team, it was during the Great Resignation. So we're like, we can't possibly attract talent if we do return to office. But the reason I didn't want to do return to office is because I just think that lives for people got a lot better. And yes, there's a massive challenge on the side of the business to kind of architect yourself to capitalize on the benefits of being fully remote. It's not for everyone. Like if you're not autonomous, if you're not already kind of like a veteran, it's a lot harder because like how are you going to mentor someone new and really be there in a fully remote environment? But there's plenty of examples out there, like Basecamp is fully remote, Counterplay is fully remote. There's a lot of people that do fully remote. So our spin on it was we want to be super flexible, meaning like if there's 3 people in Amsterdam and they want an office because they got kids at home and they need a place to quietly work together, we'll get them an office. If somebody is an artist and they want to work nights and they live on the other side of the planet and work for the project, they can live on the other side of the planet, right? And so that's kind of that was at least the philosophy behind the studio, and it's worked really well so far. I could not be like, I always tell people everything about this is amazing except for me sucking at fundraising, apparently. I feel like everybody says, no, it's not you, it's the market. I'm like, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter with the bad market. They still need to get paid, right? So like I still need to fundraise. But I'm getting slightly better as I proceed. And it's been like really rewarding to kind of see what the team has been able to do with very hard constraints. We've been able to go from, I didn't think it was possible to do this. I think we spent a sixth of what I thought we were going to spend to get the vertical slice. It's definitely like a different slice than I thought I wanted a year and a half ago. But it's been super rewarding. And so now we're actually pretty close. We have our build that's going to kind of go out to publishers. It's like ready for them to play. We just kind of put the final finishing touches on it just a couple of days ago. And half my team is going to be at TGS next week. And I'm staying back to kind of help manage the stuff. I've done all kinds of crazy nonsense. Like I cut my own trailer on like the 4 a.m. on the floor of my game director's house. I did things like I ran my own play test and sent emails out to individual testers. And so very, very cool experience. I joke with people, it's like I'm reliving my 20s. Like the 20s I forgot as a startup founder in their 20s. I'm doing it now in my 40s, which is fascinating to do while you also have 2 kids and a family. But it's been very rewarding.
So
yes, Toa, the vertical is not. You should come over and like and play it. Like just hit me up, like text me. I know Toa pretty well. He's awesome. He's like an incredible guy. Made so many awesome decisions and like the music. You know, League of Legends, like the music team in League is just insane, right? Like it's just like probably one of the highest scale cap teams in our industry. They did such groundbreaking work. It's like, you know, Toa and Veranda and like Christian Link, like just very, very cool people. And then Christian and Alex Yu went and did Arcane, which again, pretty cool with the Fortiche team. But yeah, so like I said, I'm a student of our industry. So if you ever want to talk about, you know, wax poetic on things that happen and why they happen, I'm always glad to do it.
Yeah. So, like, how much time do you spend fundraising and kind of running a business?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. I couldn't hear the question.
So was how much time do you spend fundraising and how much time do you spend actually running the business and managing people?
Well, it depends. So when I was doing VC fundraising earlier in the year, that was kind of all consuming for a bit. I'd say it was like 80-20, but I'd set it up pretty well with my co-founder, where like my co-founder's game director and he's a programmer, so he can kind of do a lot of the running of the game team on his own. And because like I told you, we're a pretty small team and everybody's sort of, they both, the DNA of the team has been people that are both, they've worked on really big projects, but they've also kind of had their own businesses and work freelance. So they kind of know how to manage each other and how to like be, they're not afraid to wear hats outside of their role, but they can also make decisions at a pretty kind of highest scale level, like the kind of decisions on quality that you would make when you have a really large team. So that has enabled me to really hard focus on fundraising when I need to, and then also kind of peel back when it's time to focus on the team. So I don't know if that answers the question, but usually it's probably more like 50-50. Okay. But at times when I'm really pushing, it's probably like 80-20 fundraising versus not.
Okay. And running your own shop, what is the most challenging part about that, you think? I mean, it's probably a lot of challenges because you wear a lot of hats, but what's the single most challenging thing about running your own shop?
I think, well, in the state I'm currently in, and especially this year, it's been just having to learn the fundraising side while doing the fundraising side, because everything I knew about building and putting together game teams and taking games to market, like that's the stuff that I think a lot of teams that don't have those muscles are sort of, they end up running into those obstacles after fundraising. But all that stuff I kind of had thought about before. And it doesn't mean that you don't have to adapt it as the market shifts and all that. But the part that I didn't know how to do was fundraising. And I just had to learn it because like nobody else on the team had a ton of expertise there. And so I tapped my network a lot. And so I think that the thing that I learned the most that was probably the hardest is the things that you have to say no to so you can actually do. And I used to think this was such a cliche too. I was like, oh, of course, like it's so nice to say like it's so hard to say no to things, right? But it's really hard to say no to the right things, right? Because it's just like you just have this like just the storm of things that you have to do, and you really need to pick the ones that matter to the business, even if there's really fun ones that you may want to do. And so I've luckily I have empowered all of my team to tell me to just leave meetings if I'm not needed, so I can go do something else. And also, like our structure is a very cool, because we're fully distributed. One of the advantages nobody talks about of having a fully distributed team that's all over the world is that your people will not meet unless they have to, right? Because they'll be like, I don't know that I'm going to meet if it's a BS meeting. We're just not going to show up. And we also record everything so you can consume it asynchronously, which makes it a really good model. So when the strike team meets, it's like 15 minutes to half an hour in and out, and then like so it's really cool. It also has taught me a lot about what things matter to different kind of personality types. Like we have this awesome environment artist, and he's super extrovert, and so I could tell he was like suffering from the fact that we don't connect enough. So like we kind of made it a point to like this, you know what, like we gotta kind of chat with him and like hang out with him a bit, like I think it'll really help. And it did, right? So it's like you just like that's the other side that like if you're kind of objective focused in your life can be hard, is thinking about team health. Luckily, my co-founder is really good at that, and he's kind of like I have learned that there's things that I'm bad at, and one of the best ways to deal with them, other than trying to get better at them, is find people that are great at them and then make them part of your team. Mm.
So technical difference with Marcus. So how have you considered equity crowdfunding? Like I know you talked about VCs. So you're going directly at the VCs, angel investors. Is it more crowdfunding?
Yeah. So because I'd spent a lot of time sort of building a network in the space, that's kind of what I gravitated towards first. I have considered crowdfunding. I haven't spent a ton of time with equity crowdfunding, although I know that John Ovadia from like Veil VR has done a really good job with that. I think other people have done like a pretty good job. I'm not super experienced in that. I think that because the game that we're trying to make is kind of this like single player action game that is going to have a story that we don't want to reveal a ton about it just yet. Because it's a very specific, like, again, I'm usually a super fan of just show it to the world and see what they say. But if you have a story that you want to tease at the right moment, if you have mechanics that you want to tease at the right moment, you want to kind of be careful about these moments of announcement because they can be real catalysts to drive interest into your game. So we kind of didn't want to go out and just put a bunch of information on a site. And you kind of have to do that with crowdfunding, right? And so it was always kind of our plan D, right? It's like, if everything else fails, then the material we're building will be good for crowdfunding. I'm actually, I love the concept of crowdfunding. I just think that until Star Citizen ships and succeeds, I think that's sort of there's been a little bit of a decline in being able to raise the kind of money you need to make stuff through crowdfunding. I think you can do a really good job with board games and card games, right? Like you could definitely like you could crowdfund that, right? But usually that's a super fascinating space too. But I think when it comes to and you can crowd certain type of games, but our game is a little bit higher scope, so it's a tricky one to crowdfund. So I'd say like if you get to a point where it's the only route available to you, then I would do it. At least in our position. I also think that it gives you a lot of advantages. If you crowdfund and win, then like a lot of conversations get easier with investors. So it's sort of like a double-edged sword. That's kind of how I've looked at it.
Yeah, it's interesting because now, yesterday, because of rates being cut, like a lot of private equity VCs were just kind of holding on to money because of like interest rates being so high. But now since interest rates are lower, it'll be interesting to see like how many more VCs
are. You completely froze
funding,
but I think I know what you're talking about. Because like we should all celebrate the interest rate drop.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yep.
You hear me now?
Back.
Yeah. Now I would say it's interesting because now for the last few years, VCs were kind of holding on to money because of higher interest rates, inflation. And now since inflation's down, not down like it could be, but it's down compared to what it was a few years ago, and interest rates are now going to go down. Be interested to see like how much more money is going to be put into games and how much more VC capital is going to be out there. Yeah, I don't know. Let the money come in.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, right? Like, because honestly, I think that I wasn't an expert on the VC side of things, but I spent quite a bit of time talking to them and thinking about them from both the kind of LP side and the sort of founder side. And it's just, I think that it's such a high risk vehicle that they have these kind of like multiple demands when it comes to returns. And I think that as a game company, there's a very specific kind of game that they would go for and a very specific kind of founder profile that they would go for. And I think that at least what I found is, especially this year, is like, you're correct. It was really hard to raise from that cohort. And I think that as the interest rates go down, they'll want to deploy just because, they maybe don't want to give their, like people don't put their money in as an LP into a VC because they want a 2% return, right? So that's sort of like they're going to have to deploy, but there's a lot of stuff in games that sort of has a much, at least our company is not trying to make, I don't want to call them gimmicks because they're kind of like innovations, but something that's like, this angle that's like, oh, this is incredibly disruptive to this kind of game, or this is incredibly disruptive, right? Like that's kind of the angle that a lot of VCs want you to take. Or on the content side, they want you to say, oh, I got the, multi-award winning writer of Witcher to help me make this next Witcher, right? And both those things they're not great for the kind of business I want to make, which is we want to do original content that I know from my, years in marketing has a very large addressable audience. And we want to take people that are highly experienced and that have shipped really great games, but that were the people actually doing the work, not just sort of the person that is credited as the person that did it, right? And so like, and the reason for that is, a practical one, right? It's the practical one of like, those are the people that can't go out and like just raise capital on their own just from being the next game director on whatever AAA title. I happen to think from a business perspective that this is a better way of building a business because you get hungrier people. You also are kind of utilizing the people that are kind of wanting to take that next step. So you're not, but again, it makes it harder to fundraise, I think. And so Again, I'm very happy when anybody gets funded in games because it creates more appetite in the investment market. But I'm much happier when somebody that got funded succeeds, because that is a much stronger signal. So I'm, all the funding that happened in like 21 and 22, that was a little bit too generous, and that we're just starting to see the outcomes of, and a lot of the outcomes end up being not too great. That's sending negative signals into the investor community, where like you can make an app and spend like 3 months making it, and if the core concept behind it is great, you can 1,000x your investment very easily, and that seems like such a better fit for VC from a mentality, right, perspective. So you need somebody that cares so much about games that they want to make a venture fund focused on games, and then they're still fighting all these other game adjacent things that you can do, and on paper seem like they can 100x or 1,000x much faster, right? It's like, oh, look, I'm going to build a chat app to connect all gamers, right? Like that's very easy to do comparatively to building a compelling game and having it succeed. It'll take a lot less. It just requires a very specific market needs, some engineering talent, right? It's not easy because making something successful is never easy, but there's a much smaller amount of capital required to get to the at-bat and really test your product market fit. And so it just feels like from a competitive perspective, what I've learned is that if you want to make games, right, you should understand the different places where the income can come from. There's a couple of really interesting models out there, right? The work for hire model is interesting, but it's tricky, right? Because when you build a work for hire studio, there's a different mentality than a original content studio. And so you end up having different kind of people working there. But it's, if you have a monthly recurring revenue, that's a great spot to be in if you want to take a stab at making your own game, right? Like you have people like Playside or Behavior or Sumo, right? They all went down and used, and even like if you go back to, you can take this same analogy to entertainment, right? Like, the reason Arnold Schwarzenegger succeeded at what he wanted to do, which is be a lead actor, is because he had like money coming in from real estate. He didn't have to work, right? Like he invested in Santa Monica at the right moment after the earthquake, and had a bunch of Santa Monica real estate that went really well. So the guy could say no to everything except lead roles, and then eventually somebody believed in him enough to give him a lead role, and the rest is history. But again,
I did not know that. I did not know that.
It's a fascinating life story if you ever want to read it. Also, one of the best biography. It's called Total Recall, which I think is hilarious. But as a brand person, I'm always a fan of people like properly branding their biographies. That's why I like Blood, Sweat, and Pixels and stuff like that. But
yeah. You mentioned that I guess you're rolling up here on a year with your studio, or at least the idea of you starting your studio. Earlier on, I guess this time last year, had you considered like trying to bootstrap it on the side, right, while you continue to work a 9 to 5? I know a lot of indie studios, they work, those individuals work at AAA studios or some other capacity, and then they kind of grow their games on nights and weekends. Can you talk about the thought process of not going that route?
Yeah, I think that if you work in the game space, there's always friends you have, and you always have 8 different games you all want to make. So you'll always be like iterating on that stuff, right? And the best studios, and this is true of our studio because we were trying to be good. They are just like, listen, you can iterate on indie stuff all day long. Just make sure your work gets done. But that's not true of all companies, right? And so some companies have pretty strict contractual requirements about like what you can and can't work on. And so you should just be like really careful about that before you start like sort of on the siding development, right? Like I would probably advise against it if you're working for ZeniMax, since there are a bunch of lawyers. But again, like this just,
or Nintendo.
Or Nintendo, right? But again, like, for the right company, like there's plenty of like really large companies that are like, we want you to have side gigs. I don't care as long as you're not making what we're making, and as long as it's not taken away from your job, right? There's plenty of companies that are open-minded about that. I would say you have a ton of leverage. Like, so this is something that's probably like a controversial take, but every VC in the world will tell you that they want you to quit your job so they know that you're 100% in. But really, it's because of that, and that it gives them an incredibly higher amount of leverage. right? Because now you don't have a job, so you need the money, right? So again, like my perspective on that is that you should actually like make sure that your financial position is secure, and it's secure for a couple of years, and that's sort of and it sucks, right? Because you're like, no, you could totally go and not like listen. You can take as much risk as you want, right? Like you could take like $100,000 of credit card debt, put it on black, and hit double, and then great, you won, right? But like, there's a lot of like risky stuff you could do in life. But my advice would be to kind of make sure you have a solid financial position, so your back is not to the wall when you go into negotiations, and so you're not forced to make decisions that aren't great. Now, the way we approached that was everybody on our team is allowed, like it was very fractional, even when me and my game director were full time. We had a couple full-time people on top of us, and then we had folks that were fractional. And everybody that was ever engaged in the project that we didn't know we had a full-time need for at this stage, we told, hey, listen, guys, like this is the need we have at this stage. You don't have to be interested if you don't want to, but if you're interested, this is kind of the amount of work. And because we were super upfront with people and we told them exactly who was going to work where and how, it allowed us to create a really flexible organization that kept the burn rate super low. And allowed us to create really cool stuff. And there's a lot of stories out there of people doing fractional things like this and succeeding. Like the guys that did, I can't remember the name of the game, but it was like a Souls-like that came out a couple of years ago. They're really high skill cap group of 5 people that just was working nights and weekends. And so you can do that. Yeah. It was, I can't believe it. I'm forgetting it. Mortal Coil, I think it's called. Mortal Coil. Yeah. Mortal something. Anyway. So that, I know it's not narrowing it down in the field of video games.
Certainly not Mortal Kombat.
Definitely not Mortal Kombat. Because Ed Boon is like the, I think, only person allowed to make those. Mortal Shell. That's right, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Jonathan's awesome.
Yeah.
I recognize all the people listening. This is awesome. Jonathan is incredible. He's really helped us out in a lot of ways. He's built the Blizzard, helped build the Blizzard cinematics team before when they were making cinematics that everybody else in the industry was like, how is that possible? And then he also worked with like Cameron on Avatar, and he's just awesome guy. Also have yet to find that hat you have, which is the upside down LA hat, which I think is like a very cool hat. Anyway, sorry, I'm like engaging with the audience. I hear
it's fine.
But yeah, so that's sort of the way that I approach it.
You've been to, and your team has been to a number of conferences. You mentioned earlier that some of your teams over at Tokyo Game Show. Like, how much of that is part of just the way you need to get the fundraising done? Like, is it a necessity? Is it just great timing and people happen to be in Japan? Like, do you have to budget that into your fundraising strategy?
So it really depends, right? Like, I think that you can do a lot digitally today. But I think that there's no substitution for in-person kind of rapport building. And I think, especially if you're raising capital, it's going to be really hard to convince someone digitally to give you like 7 figures. They'll want to get to know you. And so you can cut through a lot of the sort of nonsense, which is like people will take meetings and they'll talk to you and just waste your time. And you can cut through a lot of that by just meeting people in person and kind of reading whether or not what their degree of interest is. But there's a lot of, but it's risky to spend a bunch of money traveling, and not focusing on the building, and also, so you kind of have to just think about what and this is true of all stages of a business, frankly. Even when you have a ton of money and you're just going to afford to send people everywhere, is it really the best use of your time, right? Because it's funny. I used to build marketing plans. And to me, events, when I was at Riot, events were awesome and we loved them. And we were like overspending like crazy. But if you thought about it, it wasn't overspending because we were differentiating from everyone else by creating these community events that people could go to. And our game was free to play. So it's literally engaging with players, right?
Yeah.
But every other execution that isn't that, I usually always question because I look at it and I'm like, your team you'll be spending resource time, mental cycles, money, going to an event. You better make sure there's some degree of return on that, right? And I've found it really hard to justify, other than if you have an established franchise and people expect you to be there and you want to celebrate with them. And also, if you're building, I guess, a multi-channel marketing plan, being in person has some value. But it'll always, if you're sort of going just ROI only, or if you're building a startup, it's really hard to justify to go to a consumer event. It's also game type dependent. But there's a lot of business events that I've grown to appreciate more as I was trying to kind of connect with the people that are in charge of fundraising and signing deals and that, which have become like part of my calendar year. And then we just kind of, we also end up kind of seeing where the people that we're talking to are going to be, and then serendipitously trying to be there and have an in-person, right? So to answer, go back to your original question, is what's the purpose of the travel? Is the purpose that I have a build that I want to show 20 people and they all just happen to be in town for this event? Awesome. That's a good purpose, right? Like I can get them there. They will be a captive audience. I get to do a better job presenting in person than I could ever do digitally. Then it's a great thing to do. Outside of that, I think that there's a lot of risk to go into events. But again, like for me specifically, I already have a pretty deep network in games. So, and I've hung out with these people for years, right? So if you're new to it, it may be beneficial to go just from the perspective of find out the kind of folks that are at the events and get to know them and see what the industry is like. So it really depends where you are in your journey, I think. I kind of like that there are events to go to because you end up sort of interacting with the different slices of the industry. And there's a lot of, much as our industry is plagued with all kinds of problems, there's a lot of people who really care. It's a passion-driven industry. And I've never seen so many people at all levels be willing to just chat with anyone that just walks up to them and introduces themselves. Right? It's like, yeah, sure, you have a little bit of a Hollywood model when people, get egos because they shipped a couple of award-winning games. But there's so many more that don't, right? Because all the best people I've ever worked with, they all know that it's really hard to kind of make lightning strike multiple times. And all the best folks are just constantly just paranoid that they'll lose it. It drives, I think it drives humility, right? Like I found that it's so much more rewarding to work with folks that tend to be great, but they're just, they're always worried. They're always like, how can I keep this up? How can I keep on top of it, keep innovating, keep surprising people, delighting them, right? So to me, that's one of the things that I'm passionate about. It's one of the things that is rewarding to interact with people that are also passionate about that.
That's awesome. I agree with you. I had the experience of going to E3. The only time I've been was in 2013. My brother and I, we started our startup was Project Compute. We built an indie game discovery platform, multimedia search engine. And we had been building it and was almost exclusively focused on like AAA games. And had a handful of indie games on there, but we said, we're still working on nights and weekends bootstrapping, and so we need to go to E3 so we can validate that this is a thing. And so we had to lay off all of our interns. We wrote them all nice recommendation letters and explained to them all we had to basically a headhunting company. We were staffing juniors and seniors, tops of their respective majors into local businesses in town. But we were building this search engine in the gaming space, and it was basically like monopolizing all of our resources, and we couldn't afford to keep all the students and go to E3. So we had to shut down basically the rest of our other business and then go to E3. And even in that, Malcolm had smuggled some lasagna and cupcakes in his book bag. His wife made them, and we smuggled them over to LA, and we were staying like the Motel 6 and like eating the continental breakfast. We could save as much money as we could. But when we got there, we recognized that AAA game studios didn't care about game discovery because they have their audience baked in. But indie studios loved it, right?
And they have a marketing budget that can kind of solve the discovery problem, right?
Right.
Because marketing spend can solve a lot of the discovery problem, right?
That's true.
But to your point, like you're right, indies need discovery assistance more than even AA's, right?
Right. So in that moment, we decided we were going to make that pivot and made our platform exclusively indie. But on the other, the B side of that tape, we look now, 10 years later, and E3 is gone forever. For the same reason you said earlier, right? Like it just didn't make sense to invest into it.
It couldn't justify the spend. Also, right. I think that the ESA sort of like what's interesting, I think originally it was meant to fund the ESA, right? I guess that something came out of it because that we didn't get shut down by old politicians that wanted games to be illegal. I don't know. Something worked at that point, and then it just ceased to be like super useful. I loved it. Like I thought it was kind of, especially if you're in the marketing field, it was like this moment of celebration. You got together and meet all your buddies from all the different game studios that had scattered amongst the world. So it was interesting. And GDC is always like sort of the dev version of that. PAX was kind of really interesting for a while. Still is, right? And so it's nice that there's all these different themes to these different events to go to. And I think it's a loss for Los Angeles that E3 doesn't happen there anymore. And so I mean, sure, Los Angeles is fine, right? A thriving city. But it is a loss that, and you could tell that there was a vacuum because Keighley jumped on that, and now it's the Jeff Keighley moment of the year. Which again, props to him for it, right? Because it's he definitely did a good job building TGA and opening night and play days, right? So it's been fascinating to see that. But it's great to hear that you went to 2013. Was that the Titanfall year? Because that was a good year. That was the one with the big Titanfall robot.
I think it might have. Is it the same year as Evolve? We played the Evolve demo.
Oh,
and Destiny.
Awesome. So
Destiny.
Actually, that's so awesome because I remember going to that Evolve demo with like Chris Ashton and like Steve Goldstein from Toro Rock. Yeah. It was the first time I met them in person. And Steve had actually cut the original deal for the League of Legends physical edition, which is a wild thing to have. I have it right here. It's like so this is like PC League of Legends, right? Like this is like I don't think there are as many of these in the world because so it's like
that might be worth some coin.
One day it'll pay for my great grandson's like college, I think maybe. Solved education and we're not charging people for it, but
I remember I went and I think that was the Aliens VR demo. I stood in line for like an hour and a half to play the demo and I didn't know what type of game it was. And so I immediately started running and it's not that type of game. So I basically stood in line for an hour and a half to play for like 25 seconds before the alien killed me. And then I had to get up. So
you know what's crazy? We wanted to make an Alien VR game. I had this whole idea, but like Servius, I guess, had already gotten the deal. But we wanted to do like a Space Marines one where it was like co-op, and it was still in the concept phase. It never went anywhere. But it was like you were just basically going to be, because I played. There's a version of that was an LBE VR thing where it's like location based, and it was pretty jank, but it was like so fun because the Aliens like IP lends itself so well to VR, right? And so I'm excited. I hope that Servios made a good game. So when it comes out later this year, right? There's like Batman, Alien, there's Behemoth. Like this is the VR people are gonna eat well this holiday season.
Yeah. So we were running up here on an hour now. We wanted to thank you for your time. Wanted to just before we close out this episode, what should we look forward to from your team for the rest of this year into next year? No spoilers. You still got a lot of stuff.
Look forward to much silence. I'm sort of a believer in not really talking about stuff until you have something to talk about. And sometimes you have to kind of go back on that because maybe you need an announcement to hire people or recruit people, but we have like a deep roster of people that want to work with us. So I don't think we're going to need to do that until we actually have something to show. And when we do, we will be public about it. So you guys all get to see it and hopefully play it, and it'll be a good time. So, but the road is long. I joke with people is like the moment we get the funding that we have been chasing for a bit, that's like we've arrived at base camp of Mount Everest. The climb is yet before us, but it's felt like a climb. So
what do they say? The last 10% is the second 90%.
That's right. Like it's making me definitely stressed out right now. But it's been a joy, and thank you for having me. Like I always love talking to you. Like I think that the way you approach the industry and what you do is like super admirable and really kind of like you want to help folks, which is really nice. And that is the exact kind of energy we need, right? Like, because I think that one of the things that I love about games is that we tend to, like, there's a lot of folks that see the industry as closed, but it's very open. It's and there's a lot of tools to go out there and make a game, and to go out there and learn how to make a game. And I've found the people making games are very welcoming of newcomers. So it's great to see you help get that word out there.
Thank you. And we're excited to bring you back for a future episode whenever you're ready to share the demo. Maybe we even stream a piece of the demo here live on the podcast. So we're looking forward to the follow-up episode. And your eventual book, which I think should probably be named Serendipity.
Yes, I got lucky. Let me tell you about it.
Yeah. All right, Mario, where can people find and support you before we close this episode out?
Yeah. So Instagram at Painful Profits, because our profits can be painful, but Painful Profits, and also my estate planning platform, the Relax Estate, www.relaxestate.com. We was highlighted in by Generative AI, the largest AI, platform on LinkedIn, as one of the top 5 new AI tools out there. So definitely excited. So www.relaxestate.com.
Excellent. And you can find me on LinkedIn, which is where you're probably watching this podcast right now anyway. So let's connect if you have any questions. I'm an open book. Any introductions I can make, happy to do that. Until then, or beyond that, we will see you again next Thursday for another episode of the Level Up Your Wealth podcast. You'll have a great evening.